The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the rising bile in Yushi's throat. She gripped the edge of the examination table, the vinyl cool and slick against her clammy palms. Dr. Lin's face, usually so kind, was etched with an unusual seriousness. Yushi's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. She'd come in complaining of fatigue and nausea, common ailments for a girl working long hours at the factory. She'd expected a prescription, a pat on the hand, and a recommendation for more rest. She hadn't expected this. Yushi, right? Dr. Lin's voice, gentle yet firm, sliced through the tense quiet. The reason why you haven't had your period for 3 months because you're pregnant. The words hung in the air, suspended like dust motes in a sunbeam. Yushi stared, uncomprehending. Pregnant? But how? A wave of dizziness washed over her. She'd been so careful, so naive. She'd believed the whispered assurances, the promises of safety. A tear traced a hot path down her cheek. Her mind reeled, a chaotic whirlwind of fear and confusion. How would she tell her parents? How would she keep her job at the factory? How could she, a simple girl from the countryside, navigate this unfamiliar, terrifying terrain? Dr. Lin, mistaking her silence for shock, continued, her voice softening. It's all right, Yushi. It's a blessing, truly. You'll need to start prenatal care immediately. I'll schedule another appointment for you next week, and we'll discuss everything in detail. She reached out, placing a comforting hand on Yushi's arm. But her next words shattered the fragile calm. And there's something else you're carrying, triplets. Triplets. The word echoed in Yushi's ears, a cruel mockery of the quiet joy she'd imagined motherhood might bring. 3 babies. 3 mouths to feed, 3 bodies to clothe, 3 futures to secure. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. She felt a sob rising in her throat, a primal cry against the injustice of it all. The doctor's words of comfort faded into the background, a meaningless hum against the roaring in her ears. All she could see were 3 tiny faces, blurry and indistinct, demanding her protection, her love, her everything. And she, a young woman barely scraping by in the unforgiving city, had nothing to give. Leaving the clinic, Yushi stumbled onto the bustling street, the cacophony of city noise assaulting her ears. The bright sunlight seemed to mock her despair. The world continued to spin, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred within her. She walked, her steps unsteady, her mind a battlefield of warring emotions. Fear battled with a fierce, nascent protectiveness. Despair wrestled with a flicker of hope, a tiny ember refusing to be extinguished. She needed to think, to plan. She needed to find a way to survive. The cramped, airless room she shared with Gui Xiang, her friend from the village, suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating than ever. Gui Xiang, bless her heart, saw the tear-stained face and the trembling hands, and knew something was wrong. Yushi, never one to burden others, hesitated. How could she explain the tangled mess of fear and uncertainty that churned within her? But Gui Xiang's gentle persistence chipped away at her defenses. The words tumbled out, a jumbled confession of fear and desperation. Gui Xiang listened, her brow furrowed with concern. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. They were both young, far from home, navigating the treacherous currents of city life. They had only each other. News, as it always does in small, interconnected communities, traveled fast. Yushi's mother and brother, driven by a greed that masked itself as concern, descended upon her like vultures circling a wounded animal. Their words were saccharine, their smiles strained. They spoke of family, of support, of helping her through this difficult time. But Yushi saw the glint of calculation in their eyes, the unspoken question of how they could profit from her misfortune. Their concern wasn't for her well-being, but for the potential windfall that her triplets represented. They saw not a vulnerable young woman in need of support, but a walking, talking lottery ticket. The pressure mounted. Jo Nana, a colleague at the factory, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, saw an opportunity. She whispered suggestions of wealthy patrons, of discreet arrangements, of securing a future for her children. Yushi recoiled, disgusted by the veiled propositions. She was pregnant, vulnerable, but not desperate enough to sell her body and her children's future for a fleeting illusion of security. The city, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a trap, its glittering facade concealing a dark underbelly of exploitation and despair. She longed for the simplicity of her village, the familiar comfort of her family home, the scent of the earth after the rain. But there was no going back. She was adrift, alone, with 3 tiny lives depending on her. Then, in the midst of the storm, a lifeline appeared. Li Minji. He was a name whispered in hushed tones at the factory, a figure of immense wealth and power, a world away from Yushi's humble existence. Their paths crossed unexpectedly, a chance encounter orchestrated by fate. He was aloof, distant, seemingly uninterested in the drama unfolding around him. Yet, something in Yushi's quiet strength, her unwavering determination to protect her children, caught his attention. He saw not a victim, but a survivor. He saw not weakness, but resilience. His mother, Li Mingyue, a woman of immense kindness and wisdom, saw it too. She saw the fear in Yushi's eyes, the exhaustion etched on her young face, the fierce love burning in her heart. She offered her a refuge, a sanctuary from the storm. Yushi hesitated. She'd learned to be wary of kindness, to distrust easy offers of help. But Li Mingyue's sincerity, her genuine concern, chipped away at her defenses. She accepted the offer, a leap of faith into the unknown. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to secure a future for her children. Little did she know, this unexpected act of kindness would change her life forever. The steam rising from the giant pot blurred the vendor's harsh features, momentarily transforming him into a benevolent deity dispensing warmth and nourishment. The aroma of pork and scallions, thick and savory, clawed at Yushi's empty stomach. 3 little lives, nestled within her, stirred and demanded sustenance. Just one bun, she thought, just one to quiet the insistent gnawing. She fished her worn card from the pocket of her cheap coat, the plastic cold against her fingers. It felt lighter than usual, a disconcerting lightness that mirrored the hollowness in her chest. Hesitantly, she extended the card towards the vendor. Her heart, a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs, quickened its pace. The vendor, a burly man with a face like a weathered brick, snatched the card with a grunt and swiped it through the reader. The small machine beeped, a short, sharp sound that sliced through the ambient chatter of the busy street. Yushi held her breath, a thin thread of hope clinging to the possibility of a miracle. The beep repeated, this time followed by a harsh, robotic voice, failed to pay by card. The vendor's thick eyebrows knitted together, forming a deep furrow above his eyes. He swiped the card again, slower this time, as if sheer will could force the transaction to go through. The same robotic voice echoed, its monotone an indictment. The vendor's face, already rough, hardened further into an expression of disgust. Failed to pay by card. There's no money in this card, is it? Hey, hillbilly. Misappropriation of public funds is a prison sentence. His voice, loud and accusatory, drew the attention of the other customers queuing up for their midday meal. Yushi felt a hot flush creep up her neck, staining her cheeks a crimson red. The curious stares of the strangers, their silent judgment weighing her down, felt like physical blows. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement, to become invisible. Misappropriation of public funds? The words echoed in her mind, absurd and cruel. Public funds? The meager savings she had painstakingly accumulated, working double shifts at the factory, were barely enough to cover her rent, let alone qualify as public funds. She wanted to protest, to defend herself against this unwarranted accusation, but the words seemed to stick in her throat, forming a thick, choking lump. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over her. Yushi's mind raced, a chaotic whirlwind of anxieties and fears. How could this be happening? She had checked her balance just last week. It wasn't much, but it should have been enough for a few simple meals. Had she miscalculated? Or worse, had someone stolen from her? The thought of her family, their constant demands for money, flashed through her mind. She had sent them most of her earnings, convinced that they needed it more than she did. Had they taken more than she had sent? The possibility, sickening and chilling, made her stomach churn. I can explain, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The vendor snorted, a sound filled with contempt. Explain. Explain what? That you're a thief. A liar? He thrust the card back at her, his gesture rough and dismissive. Yushi flinched, her hand trembling as she reached out to take it. The plastic felt like a brand, searing her skin with the shame of her poverty. The vendor's words, sharp and cruel, continued to pierce her. Each syllable was a tiny dagger, twisting in the wound of her humiliation. The gnawing hunger, once a physical sensation, now morphed into a deeper, more profound emptiness. It wasn't just her stomach that was empty, it was her life. A life that, until a few weeks ago, had seemed simple, if not exactly fulfilling. Now, it was a tangled mess of anxieties, uncertainties, and a gnawing sense of despair. The bustling street, once a vibrant tapestry of sights and sounds, now seemed distorted, the colors muted, the sounds muffled. She felt disconnected, adrift in a sea of indifferent faces. Each passerby, absorbed in their own world, seemed oblivious to her plight. Or perhaps, she thought bitterly, they simply didn't care. In this vast, impersonal city, she was just another insignificant face in the crowd, a nameless, faceless nobody struggling to survive. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, a protective gesture, a silent reassurance to the three tiny beings depending on her. A fresh wave of fear washed over her. How was she going to provide for them? How was she going to protect them from the harsh realities of this world, a world where a simple steamed bun was a luxury she could no longer afford? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, blurring her vision. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. She couldn't afford to cry, not here, not now. Crying wouldn't solve anything. Crying wouldn't fill her empty stomach or magically replenish her empty card. Crying would only make her appear weaker, more vulnerable, an easier target for the predators circling in the shadows, waiting to exploit her desperation. She took a deep breath, the polluted city air filling her lungs, a stark contrast to the clean, crisp air of her village. She missed her village, the familiar faces, the slower pace of life. She missed the feeling of belonging, the sense of community that she had taken for granted. Here, in the city, she was alone, adrift in a sea of strangers, each one vying for their own survival. With a sigh, Yushi turned away from the stall, the enticing aroma of the steamed buns now a mocking reminder of her empty pockets and her uncertain future. She walked slowly, her steps heavy, her head bowed, the weight of her predicament pressing down on her like a physical burden. The city, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a prison, a concrete jungle where dreams went to die. The cheap plastic of the phone booth felt clammy against Yushi's cheek. The faint scent of stale cigarettes clung to the air, a familiar, if unpleasant, aroma of city life. Outside, the midday sun beat down on the dusty construction site, the clang of metal against metal a jarring counterpoint to the frantic beating of her heart. She dialed her mother's number with trembling fingers, each ring echoing the hollow ache in her chest. The money. It had to be there. It had to. Hello. Her mother's voice, sharp and impatient, crackled through the receiver. "Hello, Mom. Did you transfer the money in my card? You can't move this money." Yushi's voice was thin, brittle. A cold dread was starting to seep into her bones. "What are you talking about?" "Of course, I took the money. Your brother needed it." The casual dismissal in her mother's tone sent a wave of nausea washing over Yushi. The construction site swam before her eyes, the sounds blurring into a meaningless cacophony. "This is the public money for purchasing raw materials on the construction site. You took it. I'm going to jail." Each word was a lead weight dragging her down, deeper into the abyss of despair. She hadn't dared tell her mother the full extent of her predicament, the looming threat of imprisonment for misappropriating funds. She had hoped, foolishly, that maternal instinct would somehow prevail. Jail? Don't be dramatic, Yushi. It's just a little bit of money. They won't send you to jail for that, her mother scoffed, her voice laced with annoyance. Besides, your brother needed it for his business. It's an investment. He'll pay you back. The empty promise hung in the air, a hollow echo of countless other broken vows. Yushi closed her eyes, her head spinning. How could her own mother be so callous, so indifferent to her fate? "Mom, it's not my money. It belongs to the company. It's a large sum. They will press charges." The rising panic choked her voice, making it tremble. Images flashed through her mind: cold, gray prison walls, the shame, the separation from her unborn children. Then tell them someone stole it. Tell them you were robbed. Her mother's voice grew sharper, edged with impatience. You're always so naive, Yushi. You need to learn how to survive in this city. Don't be so foolish. Yushi gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white. A surge of anger, hot and bitter, rose in her chest, battling with the icy fear. Robbed? Mom, do you even hear yourself? This is fraud. This is serious. The words tumbled out, fueled by a desperate mix of anger and fear. Stop yelling at me, Yushi. Her mother's voice turned shrill. I raised you, I fed you, I clothed you. The least you can do is help your brother. Don't you have any family loyalty? The familiar guilt trip, a weapon wielded with practiced ease, pierced through Yushi's defenses. She felt a familiar pang of helplessness, a deep-seated sense of obligation that had been ingrained in her since childhood. Loyalty? What about my loyalty? What about my children? The question burst out, raw and anguished. She pressed a hand against her swollen belly, a protective gesture. I have 3 babies to think about now, Mom. 3 lives that depend on me. How am I supposed to provide for them from behind bars? A heavy silence hung on the line, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city. For a fleeting moment, Yushi dared to hope. Maybe, just maybe, her words had finally reached her mother, had pierced through the wall of selfishness. But the hope was short-lived. Triplets. 3 mouths to feed. That's even more reason for you to find a way to make more money, her mother said, her voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. This Lee Minji. He's wealthy, isn't he? Surely, he can help you. The cold calculation in her mother's voice was a chilling reminder of the transactional nature of their relationship. Yushi felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. It was a hopeless, soul-crushing weariness that went beyond the physical discomfort of her pregnancy. She realized, with a painful clarity, that she was completely alone in this fight. Her own family, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, were the ones pushing her towards the precipice. He doesn't even know about the babies, Yushi whispered, her voice hollow. The thought of revealing her predicament to Lee Minji filled her with shame and dread. He was a world apart from her, a powerful figure from a realm she could barely comprehend. Then tell him. A man like that, he has a responsibility. He'll do the right thing. The words were laced with a cynical certainty that grated on Yushi's nerves. Her mother's casual dismissal of the complexities of her situation, the callous disregard for her feelings, was more than she could bear. The right thing. Yushi repeated the words, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. What is the right thing, Mom? Is it using your own daughter as a pawn in your desperate schemes? Is it sacrificing her future for your own selfish gain? The anger burned in her chest, a fierce, protective fire. Don't talk to me like that, Yushi, her mother snapped. I'm doing what's best for this family. You're just being ungrateful. The familiar accusation, worn smooth from years of repetition, no longer held the same power. Yushi took a deep, shuddering breath. The air in the phone booth felt thick and suffocating. I can't do this anymore, Mom, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I can't keep playing this game. The words hung in the air, a final, irrevocable severing of the ties that bound them. She hung up the phone, the dull click echoing the emptiness in her heart. The world outside seemed to tilt on its axis, the sounds of the construction site fading into a distant hum. She was alone, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with the weight of 3 lives resting on her shoulders. The future stretched before her, a vast, unknown landscape filled with both terror and a strange, flickering ember of hope. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that she would find a way to survive. For herself. And for her children. The neon lights of the Golden Dragon bar pulsed against the rain-slicked streets, casting an oily sheen on the puddles. Yushi shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her. The damp chill seemed to seep right through her bones, mirroring the coldness that had settled in her stomach. Jo Nana, her colleague from the factory, had insisted on this meeting, her tone hinting at a solution to Yushi's mounting financial woes. Inside, the air was thick with the mingled scents of cheap perfume, stale cigarette smoke, and something sickly sweet Yushi couldn't place. The music, a pulsing, relentless beat, vibrated through the floor and up into her very core. She felt out of place, a small, wilting flower in a garish, overgrown jungle. Jo Nana, in contrast, seemed to thrive in this environment. She moved with a practiced ease, her tight dress shimmering under the strobe lights, her laughter echoing above the din. Yushi watched her, a knot of unease tightening in her chest. Had she made a mistake trusting her? Nana had always seemed so worldly, so confident. Perhaps she really did have a solution. A solution Yushi desperately needed. The doctor's words echoed in her ears, triplets, a word that both thrilled and terrified her. 3 tiny lives depending on her meager wages from the factory, now even more insufficient. Her mother's incessant calls, demanding money, added another layer of pressure. How was she going to manage? They settled at a small, sticky table in a dimly lit corner. Nana ordered 2 drinks, something bright and sugary that Yushi instinctively recoiled from. So, Nana began, her voice low and conspiratorial, leaning in close, I've been thinking about your situation. Yushi's hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture. Nana's knowing look made her skin crawl. What did she know? How much had she guessed? Don't worry, Nana continued, misinterpreting Yushi's discomfort. I have a plan. A way for you to make some real money. Fast. Yushi's heart pounded in her chest. Could this be the answer to her prayers? But a flicker of doubt, a small, insistent voice whispered in the back of her mind. Something about Nana's smile, the glint in her eyes, felt wrong. What kind of plan? Yushi asked, her voice barely a whisper above the music. Nana took a long sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on the women who moved between the tables, their laughter strained, their smiles fixed. Yushi followed her gaze, a growing sense of dread pooling in her stomach. The women's clothes, their mannerisms, the way the men looked at them, it clicked. A wave of nausea washed over her. No. She couldn't. Not this. Anything but this. Yushi, Nana's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and insistent, don't say I didn't help you. Wine is sold here. It's not a problem to make tens of thousands of yuan a night, just one chance. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tens of thousands of yuan. Enough to silence her mother, to provide for her babies. The image of 3 tiny faces, their futures uncertain, flashed before her eyes. But at what cost? Yushi's mind raced. The desperation clawed at her, a wild animal trapped in a cage. She thought of Gui Xiang, her friend from the village, her unwavering support. What would Gui Xiang think? The shame burned in her throat, choking her. I can't, she stammered, her voice barely audible above the music. Nana's smile faltered, replaced by a look of impatience. Don't be stupid, Yushi. This is your chance. You think those factory wages are going to feed 3 mouths? Your mother. Think about it. Every word was a blow, chipping away at her resolve. Nana was right. The factory wages wouldn't be enough. Her mother would never let her rest. But selling herself, it felt like a betrayal, a violation of something sacred. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, the pressure, the suffocating weight of her circumstances. A single image surfaced in the swirling chaos of her thoughts, a quiet afternoon in the village, the sun warm on her skin, the scent of wildflowers in the air, her grandmother's gentle hand stroking her hair. Her grandmother's words, whispered like a prayer, echoed in her ears, a good heart is a woman's greatest treasure. The memory, so vivid, so pure, steadied her. It was a reminder of who she was, of where she came from, of the values she held dear. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Nana's, now hard and calculating. No, she said, her voice firm, the tremor gone. I won't do it. The words, spoken aloud, felt like a liberation, a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds. The desperation remained, the fear still gnawed at her, but now, a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance, had ignited within her. She would find another way. A way that wouldn't compromise her soul. Nana scoffed, her face a mask of disdain. Suit yourself, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Don't come crying to me when you're starving. She stood up, smoothing down her dress, her eyes already searching the room for more promising prospects. Yushi watched her go, a mixture of relief and trepidation swirling within her. She was alone again, facing the same daunting challenges. But something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She had made a choice, a difficult choice, and in doing so, she had reclaimed a piece of herself. The neon light seemed less garish now, the music less oppressive. She took a deep breath, the stale air filling her lungs, and stood up. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, she would face it with her head held high. The crystal chandeliers cast a kaleidoscope of light across the opulent ballroom, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the glittering gowns of the guests. The air hummed with the low murmur of conversations, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes. Yushi felt utterly out of place, her simple dress a stark contrast to the surrounding extravagance. She clutched her small purse, the worn leather a familiar comfort in this alien world. This isn't me, she thought, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. This is a world I don't belong in. The opulence pressed in on her, suffocating her with its sheer excess. The scent of expensive perfume, heavy and cloying, mingled with the aroma of gourmet dishes, creating a nauseating sweetness that churned her stomach. She swallowed hard, fighting back the rising bile. I need to get out of here. But escape wasn't an option. Not yet. Not until she secured the money she desperately needed. Her mother's incessant calls, her brother's sneering demands, the growing weight of her unborn triplets, they all anchored her to this gilded cage. Li Minji, the man whose birthday they were celebrating, stood amidst a circle of admirers, his face an impassive mask. He acknowledged the greetings with polite nods and brief smiles, but his eyes held a distant, almost bored expression. Yushi had observed him from afar, noting his detachment, the subtle way he distanced himself from the women who flocked around him. He doesn't seem to enjoy this, she mused, her gaze lingering on the fine lines etched around his eyes. He looks tired. A pang of unexpected sympathy tugged at her heart. He, too, seemed trapped in this world of glittering facades. Zhou Nana, her colleague, materialized beside her, a predatory gleam in her eyes. He's handsome, isn't he? She purred, her voice dripping with insinuation. And rich. Imagine the life you could have, her words trailed off, leaving the unspoken promise hanging heavy in the air. Yushi felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She knew that look, that tone. It was the same look her brother wore when he calculated how much he could squeeze out of her meager earnings. She's up to something, Yushi thought, her stomach clenching with a premonition of unease. I need to be careful. Nana leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. I have a plan, she murmured, her eyes flickering towards Li Minji. A way for you to secure your future. And your children's. Yushi's heart hammered in her chest. What is she talking about? Fear warred with desperation. She needed money, yes, but at what cost? Nana's plan, revealed in hushed tones, was a web of deceit, a calculated manipulation that made Yushi's blood run cold. It involved drugging Li Minji, compromising him, and then presenting Yushi as the solution to his predicament. Yushi listened, her mind reeling, her initial desperation slowly giving way to a growing sense of revulsion. This is wrong, she thought, a wave of nausea washing over her. I can't do this. The party swirled around them, a blur of bright colors and forced laughter, oblivious to the insidious plot being hatched in its midst. Nana handed her a glass of wine, her smile tight and expectant. Give this to him, she instructed, her voice low and urgent. It's his favorite. Yushi stared at the wine, the amber liquid swirling gently in the crystal glass. Suddenly, a memory flashed through her mind, a whispered conversation she had overheard earlier, a mention of a special ingredient meant to loosen Li Minji's inhibitions. The pieces clicked into place, sharp and chilling. She's going to drug him, Yushi realized, her heart pounding in her ears. She took the glass, her hand trembling slightly. For a moment, she considered going along with Nana's plan. The temptation was strong, the promise of financial security a powerful lure. But the image of Li Minji's tired eyes, the flicker of vulnerability she had seen in them, held her back. I can't do this to him, she thought, her resolve hardening. I won't be a part of this. As Li Minji approached, drawn by Nana's beckoning gesture, Yushi took a deep breath and stepped forward. She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and determination. Mr. Li, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, there was medicine in the wine he drank just now. You gave me the wine. If anything happens to him, you can't get away with it. The words hung in the air, silencing the surrounding chatter. Nana's face paled, her carefully constructed mask crumbling. Li Minji's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed, focusing on Yushi with a sudden, intense scrutiny. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath, the music fading into the background as all eyes turned towards the unfolding drama. Yushi stood her ground, her heart pounding, her gaze unwavering. In that moment, the fear receded, replaced by a strange sense of calm. She had made her choice, and even though she didn't know what the future held, she knew she had done the right thing. The opulent surroundings, the glittering lights, the judging eyes, they all faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the quiet strength that bloomed within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of her village. Yushi sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table, the thin gown clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Her fingers twisted in her lap, picking at a loose thread. The doctor, a woman with a kind but weary face, studied the ultrasound images, her brow furrowed in concentration. Yushi's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Each second of silence felt like an eternity, amplifying the fear that gnawed at her insides. 3, the word echoed in her mind, a disbelieving whisper. 3 little lives, depending on me. She hadn't even known she was pregnant, let alone with triplets. How could she, a simple village girl barely scraping by in the city, possibly care for 3 babies? The shame burned in her throat, a bitter taste rising from the pit of her stomach. Her mother's disappointed face flashed before her eyes, followed by the sneering expressions of the women in her village. An unwed mother, a burden, a disgrace. Well, Miss Yushi, was it? The doctor's voice broke through her panicked thoughts. The ultrasound confirms it. You are indeed pregnant, and it appears you're expecting triplets. Yushi swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. The doctor's words, while confirming what she already suspected, still felt like a physical blow. Triplets. The word seemed to reverberate through the small, sterile room. She could barely process the enormity of it. Triplets, she echoed faintly, her voice trembling. The doctor's gaze softened, a flicker of sympathy crossing her features. She reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Yushi's arm. The touch, though gentle, sent a shiver through her. I understand this must be quite a shock, the doctor said, her voice calm and steady. It's unusual, certainly, but not unheard of. We'll need to run some additional tests to ensure everything is progressing as it should. But for now, the most important thing is to discuss your options. Options. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Yushi's mind raced. What options did she even have? She was alone, penniless, and now carrying 3 lives within her. The thought felt overwhelming, a crushing weight on her chest. She looked down at her hands, the worn calluses a testament to her hard work, her struggles. How could she possibly provide for 3 children? The fear coiled in her stomach, a cold, hard knot. Options, she repeated, the word barely a whisper. The doctor's expression turned serious. Miss Yushi, she began, her voice low and measured, given your circumstances, well, it's important to be realistic. Raising triplets is a significant undertaking, both financially and emotionally. If the father doesn't recognize the baby inside you, you have to think carefully about whether or not to have the baby. The doctor's words struck Yushi like a physical blow. The unspoken judgment hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She knew what the doctor was implying. A single, unwed mother with triplets. It was a burden, a scandal. The thought of terminating the pregnancies flitted across her mind, a fleeting shadow of desperation. But then, a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over her. These were her children. Her flesh and blood. How could she even consider such a thing? The father, Yushi began, her voice choked with emotion. The memories of that night, hazy and fragmented, flooded her mind. A fleeting encounter, a moment of vulnerability. A man she barely knew. She swallowed hard, the shame burning in her throat. He doesn't know. The doctor nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. I see, she said softly. Well, that certainly complicates things. You'll need to think long and hard about this, Miss Yushi. There are support services available, of course. But ultimately, the decision rests with you. Yushi stared at the doctor, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, shame, desperation, but also a flicker of hope. A stubborn refusal to give up. She had faced hardship before. She had survived. And somehow, she would survive this too. The doctor continued, her voice gentle but firm. We'll schedule a follow-up appointment for next week. In the meantime, I want you to take care of yourself. Eat well, rest, and try not to stress too much. This is a challenging situation, but you're not alone. Yushi nodded numbly, her mind still reeling. She rose from the examination table, her legs feeling weak and unsteady. The sterile white walls of the hospital seemed to close in around her, suffocating her. She longed for the familiar scents and sounds of her village, for the comfort of her grandmother's gentle touch. But she was alone, adrift in this unfamiliar city, facing an uncertain future. As she stumbled out of the hospital, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding her, Yushi felt a surge of determination harden within her. She would not be defeated. She would find a way. For herself, and for the 3 tiny lives growing within her. She clutched her stomach protectively, a faint smile playing on her lips. She had a battle ahead of her, but she was ready to fight. The city stretched out before her, a vast and indifferent landscape. But somewhere within its concrete canyons, she would find her place. She had to. For her children. The stale air of the cramped apartment hung heavy with the scent of instant noodles and desperation. Yushi sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the ultrasound image clutched in her hand, the black and white blobs a stark reminder of the life growing inside her lives, plural. Triplets. The word echoed in her mind, a dissonant chord against the backdrop of her meager existence. 3 tiny mouths to feed, 3 small bodies to clothe, 3 futures to shape. How could she, a simple girl from the countryside, barely scraping by in the unforgiving city, possibly manage? Her stomach twisted, not with morning sickness, but with a gnawing fear that threatened to consume her. A harsh rap at the door shattered the fragile quiet. Her mother's voice, sharp and demanding, sliced through the thin wood. Yushi. Open this door. We need to talk. Yushi's heart pounded. She already knew what this conversation would entail. It wouldn't be about support, about shared burdens, about maternal love. It would be about money. Dragging herself to her feet, Yushi opened the door. Her mother, followed by her brother, barged in, their faces a mixture of avarice and thinly veiled contempt. So, it's true then? Her mother's eyes darted around the cramped room, as if assessing its potential for profit. Triplets. Imagine the compensation. Compensation. The word stung Yushi like a slap. Were her children merely commodities to be bartered for cash? A wave of nausea washed over her. She swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue. Mother, she began, her voice trembling, I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play coy with me, her mother scoffed, planting herself on the only chair. The father that wealthy businessman, Lee Minji he'll have to pay. 3 children. This is our chance to finally escape this wretched poverty. Yushi recoiled. Her mother's words felt like a violation, stripping her of agency, reducing her unborn children to pawns in a twisted game of financial gain. Mother, it's not like that, Yushi pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. The image of Lee Minji flashed in her mind, his aloof demeanor, the brief, almost surreal encounter that had led to this miracle, this burden. Could she really burden him with this? Could she even face him? The shame burned in her throat. Her brother, always lurking in the shadows of his mother's schemes, sneered. Don't be stupid, Yushi. This is our ticket to a better life. Old man Zhao, the butcher, he's taken an interest. He's willing to overlook your condition in exchange for a hefty sum. We've already agreed on a price. A cold dread spread through Yushi's veins, turning her limbs to ice. Old man Zhao. A man twice her age, known for his cruel temper and penchant for drink. The thought of being tied to him, of sacrificing her future and the future of her children to his whims, was unbearable. No, she choked out, shaking her head vehemently. I won't. I can't. You have no choice, her mother's voice rose to a shriek. We've already accepted the money. Do you think we can simply return it? He'll ruin us. The room spun. Yushi clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Trapped. She felt utterly trapped, caught in a web of deceit spun by the very people who should have protected her. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, hot and bitter. Days turned into weeks, each one a torturous dance between her family's relentless pressure and her desperate attempts to find a way out. She worked double shifts at the factory, her body aching, her spirit weary, the constant fear a dull ache in her chest. Gu Xiang, her friend from the village, offered a sympathetic ear, a shoulder to cry on, but even her unwavering support couldn't dispel the suffocating darkness. Then, one evening, as Yushi walked home, exhausted and defeated, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing the impassive face of Li Minji's assistant. Miss Yushi, the assistant said, his voice devoid of emotion, Mr. Li requests your presence. Fear warred with a flicker of hope in Yushi's chest. What could he possibly want? The uncertainty was agonizing. The ride to Li Minji's opulent mansion was a blur of flashing lights and unfamiliar streets. She sat stiffly in the back seat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was ushered into a grand living room, the sheer opulence of the space making her feel even smaller, more insignificant. Li Minji sat on a plush sofa, his posture as impeccable as ever. He looked up as she entered, his gaze piercing, unsettling. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Yushi stammered, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under his intense scrutiny. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, to deny the accusations that she knew were swirling around her like vultures. But the words caught in her throat. The children, Li Minji said, his voice low and steady, they are mine, aren't they? The question hung in the air, stark and unavoidable. Yushi's breath hitched. How did he know? Had her family contacted him? Had they betrayed her yet again? She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable onslaught of accusations, the demands for money, the public humiliation. But it never came. Instead, a different voice, softer, kinder, filled the room. Yushi, dear, it was Li Minji's mother, her face etched with concern. We understand. We've heard stories about your family's difficulties. We want to help. Yushi opened her eyes, confusion swirling within her. Help. Not condemnation. Not accusations. She looked from Li Minji's impassive face to his mother's gentle smile, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. The truth, once a heavy burden, now felt like a lifeline. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. They are yours. The acrid scent of disinfectant clung to Yushi's clothes, a constant reminder of her new reality. She pushed the cleaning cart down the gleaming hallway of Li Minji's company, the squeak of the wheels a lonely counterpoint to the hushed whispers that followed her. Each polished surface reflected her own weary face, a stranger staring back at her from the pristine glass. 3 lives growing within her. 3 mouths to feed. The weight of it pressed down, heavy and suffocating. This gleaming world of steel and glass felt alien, a universe away from the dusty fields of her village. How had she ended up here? A cleaner, pushing a mop, a universe away from the dream she'd once held, so fragile and easily shattered. Jo Nana, perched on the edge of her desk, filed her nails with an air of disdain. Her gaze, sharp as broken glass, flicked over Yushi. "Look who it is," she said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that never reached her eyes. "Our resident cleaning lady." The other women at the desk tittered, their laughter like the prick of needles. Yushi's stomach clenched. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows, but the growing bulge of her belly betrayed her, a silent testament to her vulnerability. "Ignore them," she told herself, her internal voice a thin thread of defiance against the rising tide of shame. "They don't matter. Your children matter." "Heard she's got 3 buns in the oven," another woman chimed in, her voice a stage whisper that carried across the open office. "Must be some kind of record." Yushi's face burned. The whispers followed her down the hall, clinging to her like the smell of disinfectant. "They don't understand." The thought echoed in her mind, a hollow defense against the judgment in their eyes. "They don't know what it's like to be alone, to have nothing but the weight of responsibility pressing down on you." She reached the executive washroom, the cool marble a stark contrast to the burning in her cheeks. The door swung open, revealing Li Minji's mother, her elegant presence filling the space. Madame Li's eyes, warm and understanding, met Yushi's. For a moment, the world outside, with its whispers and judgments, ceased to exist. "Yushi," Madame Li greeted her, her voice gentle. "How are you feeling today?" The genuine concern in her voice startled Yushi. No one here, in this cold, gleaming world, had asked her that. "Not truly." "I'm fine, Madame Li," Yushi stammered, clutching the cleaning cart as if it were a lifeline. "Nonsense, child," Madame Li said, a hint of steel entering her voice. She turned to her daughter, Li Mingyue, who stood beside her. "Mingyue, have you arranged for the new uniform I requested for Yushi?" Li Mingyue nodded, her expression mirroring her mother's concern. "It's ready, mother. I'll have it delivered to her directly." Yushi stared at them, confusion warring with a flicker of hope. A new uniform. Why? She was just a cleaner. "You shouldn't be doing this kind of work in that condition, Yushi," Madame Li said, her gaze resting on Yushi's belly with a warmth that made Yushi's eyes prickle with unexpected tears. "My son, well, he can be oblivious sometimes. He doesn't realize the pressure you're under." The pressure. The word resonated deep within Yushi's soul. It wasn't just the physical strain, it was the weight of the world, the fear of the future, the loneliness that gnawed at her in the quiet hours of the night. "But Madame Li," Yushi began, her voice choked with emotion, "I need to work. I have to." Madame Li raised a hand, silencing her. "I understand, child. And we will help you. But not like this. You will have a proper position here, one that suits your circumstances." She paused, her eyes searching Yushi's. "Minji doesn't know yet. He's preoccupied. But I will speak to him. In the meantime, Mingyue will take care of everything." Yushi could only nod, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The kindness in Madame Li's eyes, the genuine concern in her voice, it was a lifeline in this vast, indifferent ocean. Later that day, a new uniform arrived, a simple but elegant dress, tailored to accommodate her growing belly. It was a world away from the shapeless, disinfectant so beautiful she'd been wearing. As she slipped it on, a strange sensation washed over her. It wasn't just the soft fabric against her skin, it was the feeling of being seen, of being valued. For the first time since arriving in the city, a sliver of hope pierced through the darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wouldn't have to face this alone. The whispers still echoed in the hallways, the stairs still followed him, but now, there was a shield, a fragile but growing sense of protection, emanating from the unexpected kindness of the Lee family. The weight hadn't lifted, not entirely, but it felt bearable. The future was still uncertain, a vast, uncharted territory, but for the first time in a long time, Yushi allowed herself to imagine a different path, a path where she wasn't alone, where her children might have a chance. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now mingled with a hesitant, fragile hope, a seed planted in the barren landscape of her despair. The chipped paint on the hospital wall seemed to mock Yushi's predicament. 3 heartbeats echoed in her ears, 3 tiny lives depending on her, a young woman who barely knew how to navigate the complexities of the city, let alone motherhood. The doctor's words, triplets, a rare and precious occurrence, felt less like a blessing and more like a lead weight dragging her down. Her hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach, a mixture of wonder and terror churning within. How could she possibly manage? The meager wages from her factory job barely covered her own expenses. The metallic tang of fear coated her tongue as her mother and brother's faces materialized in her mind. Their initial shock had quickly morphed into a calculating gleam, their words thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. She shuddered, the sterile chill of the hospital suddenly intensifying. Just as she was contemplating the daunting future, a shadow fell across the doorway. Her mother, face etched with a mixture of false concern and barely suppressed eagerness, entered the room, followed by her brother, his usual indolent posture accentuated by a newly acquired swagger. Yushi's stomach clenched. She knew that look. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey. "Yushi, my dear daughter," her mother began, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that grated on Yushi's nerves. "We were so worried. Triplets. What a blessing but also a burden, no?" The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Yushi's internal monologue screamed. Burden? They see my children, my miracle, as a burden? What kind of mother, what kind of brother? She forced a weak smile. "It's a challenge, mother. But I'll manage." She knew her voice lacked conviction, her resolve crumbling under the weight of their expectant gazes. Her brother, never one for subtlety, cut to the chase. "Manage? How? With your pathetic factory wages? You can barely feed yourself, let alone 3 babies. You'll need help, Yushi. Significant help." Yushi felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She knew what was coming. The veiled threats, the thinly disguised demands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. They want money, she realized with a sickening clarity. They see my children as a means to an end. "We're your family, Yushi," her mother chimed in, placing a hand, cold and clammy, on Yushi's arm. "We're here to help you navigate this delicate situation. We wouldn't want anything untoward to happen, would we?" The unspoken threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Yushi felt trapped, cornered like a small animal facing a pack of wolves. Her mind raced, desperately seeking an escape route, a way out of this suffocating web of manipulation. Untoward? What do they mean? What are they planning? A shiver ran down her spine. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room seemed to buzz ominously, reflecting the growing anxiety within her. "Mother, brother, I don't understand what you're saying," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her brother scoffed. "Don't play coy, Yushi. We know you're in a vulnerable position. This news, it could ruin your reputation. People talk. They judge." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "But we can manage the situation. For a price, of course." Yushi's breath hitched. Blackmail. They were blackmailing her. Her own family. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the harsh lines of their faces. How can they? My own flesh and blood. Just when she thought she couldn't bear it anymore, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Yushi looked up, her vision still blurry with tears. Li Mingji stood at the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his presence radiating an unexpected sense of calm amidst the storm. His eyes, usually cool and distant, held a spark of something she couldn't quite decipher. Her mother and brother visibly flinched, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under his gaze. Mr. Li, her mother stammered, her voice losing its sugary sweetness. We were just concerned about Yushi. Offering our support. Li Mingji's gaze swept over them, his expression unreadable. I see. But I believe Ms. Yushi is perfectly capable of handling her own affairs. Unless, of course, there's something you're not telling me. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. Her mother and brother exchanged nervous glances, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. They knew Li Mingji's reputation, his power and influence. They knew they were outmatched. No, no, Mr. Li. We wouldn't dare, her brother mumbled, his swagger replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Li Mingji's gaze lingered on them for a moment longer, a silent warning that spoke volumes. Then, he turned to Yushi, his expression softening. Are you all right, Ms. Yushi? Yushi nodded, her voice still caught in her throat. She couldn't speak, couldn't articulate the relief that flooded through her. He had saved her. He had seen through their charade and intervened. Come, he said gently, extending a hand towards her. Let's get you out of here. As Yushi placed her hand in his, a sense of security washed over her, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been craving. She glanced back at her mother and brother, their faces a mixture of resentment and fear. She felt a pang of sadness, a flicker of the love she once held for them, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming relief of escape. Later, as the police escorted her mother and brother away, Yushi watched from the safety of Li Mingji's car. His mother, Li Mingyue, sat beside her, a comforting presence, her hand resting reassuringly on Yushi's. The older woman's kind eyes held a depth of understanding that touched Yushi deeply. She had found refuge, not just from her family's exploitation, but from the fear and uncertainty that had consumed her. The weight on her chest lifted, replaced by a fragile hope, a tentative belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she could navigate this new, daunting chapter of her life. The soft glow of the bedside lamp painted the room in a warm, honeyed hue. Yushi sat on the edge of the plush bed, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. The gentle rise and fall of her breath was a quiet rhythm in the stillness of the room. She glanced around, taking in the unfamiliar elegance, the rich mahogany furniture, the intricately patterned carpet, the sheer curtains that draped like waterfalls from the high windows. It was a world away from the cramped, dusty room she shared with Gui Xiang, a world she never imagined inhabiting. A wave of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, washed over her. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind, the shock of the triplets, her family's avarice, the suffocating feeling of being trapped. Even now, nestled in the apparent safety of Li Mingji's home, a tremor of unease ran through her. Could she truly believe in this unexpected turn of fortune? The door clicked open, and Li Mingji entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. He carried a tray laden with a steaming bowl of soup and a plate of delicately arranged fruit. He set it down on the nightstand, his movements careful and deliberate. The doctor said you need to keep your strength up, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Yushi looked up at him, her heart a flutter of conflicting emotions. Gratitude warred with suspicion, hope with a deep-seated fear of vulnerability. She'd learned to be wary of kindness, especially from those who had the power to take it away just as easily. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, the proximity sending a shiver down her spine. You're safe here, Yushi, he said, his gaze steady and reassuring. "No one can hurt you or your children." His words, though simple, held a weight that resonated deep within her. For the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could allow herself to believe him. He ladled a spoonful of soup and held it out to her. "Eat," he urged gently. Yushi hesitated for a moment, then opened her mouth, the warmth of the soup spreading through her like a balm. As she ate, Li Minji watched her, a strange tenderness in his eyes. It was a look she hadn't seen before, a look that hinted at something deeper than mere politeness or pity. It was a look that made her breath catch in her throat. Later, as she lay nestled against the pillows, Li Minji sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on her belly. The rhythmic flutter of the baby's movements beneath his touch was a tangible reminder of the life growing within her. "They're strong," he murmured, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just like their mother." Yushi turned her head to look at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and awe. In that moment, the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. "Li Minji," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you doing all this for me?" He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Because," he said, his voice low and husky, "I see a strength in you, a resilience that I admire. And because," he added, his gaze softening, "I find myself drawn to you, Yushi. More than I ever thought possible." A blush crept up her cheeks, warming her from the inside out. She'd never imagined that someone like him, a man of such wealth and power, could be drawn to her, a simple country girl with nothing to offer but her unwavering spirit. "Two don't know what to say," she stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "Just let me take care of you, Yushi. Let me give you and your children the future you deserve." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, bathing the room in a soft, golden light. Yushi awoke to the sound of gentle laughter. Li Mingyue, Li Minji's mother, sat beside the bed, her face alight with affection as she watched the triplets, now nestled safely in their cribs. The babies, tiny and perfect, slept soundly, their faces serene and untroubled. "They are beautiful, Yushi," Li Mingyue said, her voice filled with warmth. "A true blessing." Yushi smiled, her heart overflowing with love for her children and gratitude for the unexpected kindness she'd been shown. Li Minji entered the room, a soft smile gracing his lips as he watched the scene unfold. He walked over to Yushi and gently kissed her forehead. "Good morning," he whispered. "How are my girls feeling today?" Yushi looked up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're perfect," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his love and the gentle presence of his mother, Yushi knew that she had finally found her safe haven. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted her were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and belonging. She had found not just a home, but a family. The future, once a daunting expanse of uncertainty, now stretched before her, filled with the promise of love, security, and happiness. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows of Li Minji's office, painting the modern space in a warm, almost ethereal glow. Yushi sat on the plush sofa, the soft leather a stark contrast to the worn fabric of the dresses she was used to. Her hands, calloused from years of farm work, nervously smoothed the folds of her simple skirt. She'd never imagined she'd be here, in the heart of the city, in the office of a man like Li Minji. The silence hummed with unspoken words, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her like a physical burden. She glanced at Gue Xiang, her friend's presence a small comfort in this alien environment. Gue Xiang offered a reassuring smile, her eyes reflecting the shared journey they'd endured. Yushi took a deep breath, the faint scent of lilies from a nearby arrangement calming her frayed nerves. Could she really leave behind the fear and uncertainty that had clung to her like a shadow? The door opened and Li Minji entered, his presence immediately filling the room. He wasn't smiling, but there was a softening in his eyes, a subtle shift in his demeanor that Yushi hadn't noticed before. It was as if the impenetrable wall around him had crumbled, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. He addressed her directly, his voice low and steady. "Yushi, I've spoken with the board, and they've agreed to create a new department focused on corporate social responsibility. I want you to lead it." Yushi's heart pounded against her ribs. A department? Let it? Her mind raced, struggling to grasp the enormity of his offer. She, a simple girl from the countryside, leading a department in a prestigious company? It felt like a dream, a fantastical escape from the grim reality she'd been trapped in. Don't know what to say," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "Say yes," Gue Xiang whispered, squeezing Yushi's hand. "This is your chance, Yushi. Your chance to build a life for yourself and your children." Yushi looked at Gue Xiang, her friend's unwavering belief in her a powerful motivator. Then, she turned to Li Minji, her gaze meeting his. There was a sincerity in his eyes, a genuine desire to help, that dispelled her lingering doubts. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, I accept." A wave of relief washed over her, so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. It was more than just a job, it was a lifeline, a symbol of hope in a world that had seemed determined to crush her. Li Minji nodded, a hint of a smile finally gracing his lips. He turned to Gue Xiang. "And you, Gue Xiang, will be Yushi's assistant. Your loyalty and support have been invaluable to her, and I trust you to continue to be her strength." Gue Xiang beamed, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Li. I won't let you down." Later that day, in the company cafeteria, the atmosphere was charged with a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. Yushi sat with Gue Xiang, surrounded by her colleagues, their whispers and curious glances a stark contrast to the earlier disdain and pity. Zhou Nana, her face a mask of barely concealed envy, approached their table. "Congratulations, Yushi," she said, her voice strained. "I never doubted your resourcefulness." Yushi met her gaze, her own expression calm and unwavering. She knew Zhou Nana's words were laced with insincerity, a veiled attempt to reclaim some semblance of power. But Yushi no longer felt the need to defend herself. She had found her footing, her own strength. "Thank you, Zhou Nana," she replied simply, the subtle dismissal in her tone unmistakable. Inside, she felt a quiet triumph. She had not only survived but had risen above the pettiness and exploitation. The news had reached her family as well. Her mother and brother arrived, their faces a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. They showered her with belated congratulations, their words dripping with false concern. Yushi listened patiently, their greed and manipulation now transparent. She knew they would continue to try and exploit her, but she was no longer the naive girl they could easily control. She had learned to navigate the complexities of the city, to protect herself and her future. That evening, Yushi found herself at the Li family mansion, a sprawling estate that seemed a world away from her humble beginnings. Li Mingyue, Li Minji's mother, welcomed her with open arms, her warmth and kindness a balm to Yushi's weary soul. "My dear Yushi," she said, her eyes twinkling, "Minji has told me everything. You are a strong and courageous woman, and I am so happy to welcome you into our family." Yushi's heart swelled with emotion. Acceptance. She had finally found it, not only from Li Minji but from his family as well. The fear and loneliness that had haunted her began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of belonging, a feeling of hope for the future. She looked at Li Minji, who stood beside his mother, his gaze steady and reassuring. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her. In that moment, surrounded by kindness and support, Yushi knew she had found not just a job, not just a home, but a family. The city, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now held the promise of a new beginning, a life she could build with her children, surrounded by those who genuinely cared for her. The journey had been arduous, filled with pain and betrayal, but it had led her here, to this moment of peace, this hard-won happiness. And as she looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep within her soul, that she was finally home.